So, in part one, I elucidated the problem and my solution for it. In part two, I kind of tried to adopt, I didn't try to, but I was just very tempted by the notion that I was leaving something out, and so I adopted the devil's advocate position and advanced the problem further. But now, here in part three of What's So Great About Human Consciousness, I think I've honed my language on the matter a little bit more. So, I think I would say that the best way to describe consciousness is to say that it is the experience of yourself. And I can't see a flaw in this analogy, in this analogous way where we experience other things and we don't necessarily assume that that's the final reality of them, or that there's some metaphysics that has to underlie it. We look outside and we see the fields and the trees, and they're green. The grass is green. But the grass in and of itself isn't green. That's an appearance. The grass, it's actually quite a superficial appearance too, because it's just the particular frequency of visible light to us humans that is or isn't reflected that makes it green. It's very extrinsic property. You wouldn't want to say that there's much metaphysical reality to it when tiny genetic tweaking could probably change it from green to something else. Maybe not. I mean, maybe the green is important because chlorophyll is important. There are other reasons it wouldn't function, but that doesn't make it any more essentially green. There are many things that we observe, and this is just an example of a broad frame that I think isn't very controversial. There are many things that we observe that we accept that there's a limitation, and that what we're doing is we're experiencing it from a certain perspective. The perspective that our senses evolved in. Our sight evolved to determine a particular frequency. Our hearing evolved to understand a certain range of sounds. And really our brain interferes a lot with sound and tries to impose its own language intelligence into interpreting sound. Other things, I mean, there may be ranges of hot and cold that have very subtle and fine distinctions that to some alien race would be meaningful, but to us would burn the skin right off of our hands and render us unable to even experience them. And every now, I mean, in some of the senses seem to point to direct, important, large properties, and some don't. And in some cases it does, and in some cases it doesn't. So basically our senses are sort of an unreliable method of determining what's true about the object that we're sensing. So, analogy time. In our sense of self, which is consciousness, I would say that it's also an unreliable way of determining what is true about ourselves, since we experience ourselves via consciousness. It doesn't necessarily follow that we are that consciousness, or that our consciousness has any actual importance. We may in fact simply be the thing that we experience, the body, the animal, the human animal. We may be that and have the property of consciousness, which is that we experience ourselves as conscious, nothing more. That's so. Hold on a second. Okay, I lost my train of thought there for a minute. I had to think, because there was one more thing I wanted to say before I concluded this. So basically, I would say that consciousness is the way we experience ourselves, and basically put the period there. What I think is required at this point is to say, okay, you want to say that there's something I haven't explained about consciousness. You want to claim that there's something strange that I haven't accounted for in consciousness. I think what needs to be done is there needs to be a robust elucidation of exactly what is missing in this consciousness, in this account of consciousness. And I think it needs to be done in such a way that the metaphysical claims that consciousness is making are made clear, and the metaphysical assumptions that the complainant is making are clear, so that you can see that basically, I think what happens at this point is you make this sort of basic, sort of rudimentary case, and you say, now what's the problem? And then they say something, and you go, well, you see, you're just assuming that something. I think that's what happens. I think that there's some assumption that goes on of a mysteriousness that may not be there. There's an assumption that there's a claim to a soul that there is no claim. So just to say that, human beings are an animal, and that animal experiences itself in a very robust way, and that's it. Where is the mysteriousness? And there really may be some progress to be made by making very clear what the mysteriousness precisely is or isn't.